The Arizona sun rose like a burning coin over the dusty plains, spilling gold over the vast stretch of Fort Ridge, one of the oldest and most disciplined U.S. military bases in the Southwest. By 0600 hours, the air already shimmered with heat, and the rhythmic thump of boots echoed across the field as recruits assembled for morning drills. The base looked like a scene of perfect order, rows of soldiers, standing tall, rifles gleaming, voices united in salute. But beneath that order, something tense brewed, something no one could yet name. At the center of the field stood Sergeant Daniel Cross, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, face hard as granite. He had served 3 tours overseas, earned medals for valor, and carried scars both visible and buried deep beneath his uniform. The men respected him. The women, however, often feared him. Cross was known for his precision and his temper, the kind of man who believed that pain built discipline and that emotion was a weakness. Among the new recruits stood Private Emily Harper, 22 years old, fresh out of basic training. She had joined the Army not out of desperation, but out of pride. Her father had served before her, and she grew up believing the uniform was sacred, something that represented equality, respect, and courage. She was quick to learn, calm under pressure, and never backed down from a challenge. And though she never meant to, that quiet confidence often caught Cross's attention, and not in a way she would have wanted. That morning, the air was tense. Cross paced along the line of recruits, his boots grinding into the sand. "This base is not a playground," he barked. "You're soldiers, not civilians. Every mistake you make could cost lives. Do you understand that?" "Yes, Sergeant." The recruits roared. His gaze stopped on Emily. "Private Harper," he snapped. "Sir," she responded, snapping to attention. "You think you're ready for inspection today?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Then prove it. Drop and give me 20. Without hesitation, Emily fell to the ground and began her push-ups, her movements sharp, steady, disciplined. Cross watched, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. "Faster," he barked. She obeyed. "Louder count," he shouted. She raised her voice, her tone unshaken. When she was done, he looked down at her, expression tight. "Not bad, Private, but let's see how you handle real pressure." The squad looked uneasy. They'd seen this before, Cross's way of pushing someone until they cracked. He always found a target. Today, that target was Emily. As the sun climbed higher, sweat rolled down every neck and brow. The Arizona heat had a way of stripping people bare physically and mentally. Cross shouted command after command, pushing his recruits to their limits. Yet Emily didn't falter. Every move was precise, every response confident. That's what bothered him. He told himself he was only testing her resolve, but deep down, it was something darker, an ego, bruised by how calm she remained. She never challenged him directly, but her composure seemed to say, "You can't break me." And for a man like Cross, that was a challenge he couldn't ignore. By noon, the drills turned brutal. Recruits dropped from exhaustion, sweat soaking their uniforms. Emily kept going, breath ragged but controlled. When Cross ordered them into formation for the final run, she was still front and center. "Harper," he shouted, "keep that line straight. This isn't a dance routine." "Yes, Sergeant," she replied, adjusting her step. Eyes forward. "Yes, Sergeant." Still, she held her ground. Her calm tone only made him angrier. In the distance, Captain Reynolds, the base officer, watched from the command building. He'd noticed the growing tension between Cross and Harper over the past few days. "He's pushing her too hard," Reynolds muttered to his aide. "That girl's strong, but Cross doesn't know when to stop." Inside, rumors had already started. Cross had been under pressure lately. Word spread that an inspection team from Regional Command was due later that day. Fort Ridge's record had to look perfect. Any flaw, any failure could cost Cross his standing, and the thought of losing control of his squad was something he couldn't bear. The afternoon sun scorched the earth as the recruits assembled once more. Their uniforms were drenched, their faces flushed with fatigue. Emily's hands trembled slightly, but she stood tall. The whistle blew, and the squad began the next exercise, an endurance march carrying weighted packs. They moved in formation, boots pounding the dirt in rhythm. Cross followed alongside, shouting corrections. Emily, despite her exhaustion, kept perfect stride. She noticed one of the younger recruits behind her stumble. Without thinking, she reached out, steadying him before he fell. That single act kindness. During discipline caught Cross's eye like an insult. "Private Harper!" he roared. "What was that?" "Helping a fellow soldier, Sergeant." "You don't help anyone until I tell you to." "Yes, Sergeant." He walked closer, his voice rising with each word. "You think you know better than me, Private?" "No, Sergeant." "Then why are you acting like a damn officer?" "I was maintaining unit integrity, Sergeant." A few recruits looked away, pretending not to notice. Cross's jaw tightened. He was a man used to total control, and in that moment, her composure felt like defiance. The whistle blew again. The squad halted. Everyone knew something was about to happen. Cross stepped right up to Emily. Their boots almost touched. "You've got an answer for everything, don't you?" "Only when asked, Sergeant." Silence stretched. The desert wind howled faintly through the open field. He took a step closer, his voice low but shaking. "You think you're tougher than me? You think being a woman gives you some special pass here?" Emily didn't blink. "No, Sergeant. I think respect goes both ways." That was it, the line that cut through his restraint like a blade. His face twisted, veins standing out at his temples. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then, without warning, his hand shot out. The sound was sharp and hollow, a slap that cracked through the air like a gunshot. Emily's head snapped to the side. Her cap fell to the ground. The field went dead silent. Every recruit froze. No one dared move. The world itself seemed to pause. Emily staggered a step back, her cheek blazing red, but she didn't fall. Her eyes, steady as ever, rose to meet his. She said nothing. The silence stretched for an eternity. Cross's breathing was heavy, his expression wild with something between rage and regret. Finally, a soft voice broke the quiet from somewhere in the back of the formation. He hit her. Cross turned sharply, but the voice was already gone, swallowed by the wind. Somewhere, a hand reached for the base radio. "Command, this is Unit 4. We have an incident," a trembling voice said into the receiver. Inside the operations center, the radio operator froze mid-sentence. The words repeated in his head like an alarm. He struck her. He struck a recruit. Out on the field, Emily bent down slowly, picked up her cap, and put it back on. Then she straightened, looked directly at Cross, and said calmly, "Permission to return to formation, Sergeant." He didn't answer. The base clock ticked past 12:03 p.m. In exactly 3 minutes, everything at Fort Ridge would change. The radio operator's trembling hand hovered above the transmit button. His eyes darted toward his superior officer, unsure what to do. No one wanted to be the one to report a superior, especially a man like Sergeant Daniel Cross. But the operator's training screamed louder than his fear. He pressed the button. "Command, this is Fort Ridge Operations. We have a critical incident on the training field. Repeat. A critical incident. Possible assault between ranks." Inside the operations room, the hum of machinery continued, as usual, the rotating radar, the beeping communication consoles, but the words that now filled the air seemed to freeze everyone in place. "Assault between ranks?" repeated Captain Reynolds, stepping out of his office. "Who's involved?" The operator swallowed hard. "Sergeant Cross, sir, and Private Harper." Reynolds stopped cold. His eyes widened slightly, but his voice remained controlled. "Are you certain?" "Yes, sir." Multiple witnesses confirmed. The captain exhaled through his nose, slowly, heavily. He knew Daniel Cross knew the man's temper, his pride, and his growing frustration. But he also knew that this striking a recruit was not something that could be hidden, excused, or reasoned away. Not in the modern U.S. military. Not in this climate. Reynolds straightened, his jaw tightening. "Notify Colonel Davis immediately. And keep this off the general channel for now. No leaks until we confirm everything." "Yes, sir." Meanwhile, back on the field, the soldiers still stood frozen, like figures carved in stone. Sergeant Cross remained rooted to the ground, his hand hanging by his side as if it didn't belong to him. His breathing was uneven, his heart pounding against his ribs. He could feel the heat of dozens of stares, boring into his back, his men, his recruits, his command. Private Emily Harper stood in the front line, back straight, chin lifted. Her cheek throbbed with pain, but she didn't touch it. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence around her was louder than any words could be. Cross's mind raced. What did I just do? The slap had come like lightning, uncontrolled, instinctive, and final. For years, he'd trained himself to command through intimidation. He believed fear bred discipline. But now, standing there, with that handprint already fading from her face, he realized something. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He turned, ready to bark an order, to regain control. "Squad, sir," interrupted one of the corporals, voice shaking. "Captain Reynolds requests your presence at command center." "Immediately." Cross's voice faltered. "Now?" "Yes, sir, immediately." The sergeant's throat tightened. He nodded stiffly, adjusting his cap, and marched away, boots pounding the dirt like thunder. As soon as he disappeared, the recruits exhaled all at once, as if waking from a trance. A few rushed toward Emily. "Are you okay?" whispered one of them. She nodded. "I'm fine." "Don't make a scene." Her tone was calm, almost eerily so. She stood tall, her uniform dusty but immaculate. "He made a mistake," she said softly. "But the army doesn't." Inside the command center, tension thickened the air like smoke. Captain Reynolds stood near the window, watching Cross approach from a distance. He saw a man who had once been one of the base's best disciplined, relentless, but also one who had been cracking under invisible weight for months. When Cross entered, Reynolds didn't waste time. "What the hell happened out there, Sergeant?" Cross's face hardened. "She broke formation, sir. Talked back during command. I corrected her." "Corrected her?" Reynolds's voice rose. "You hit her." Cross's jaw clenched. "It wasn't intentional. It was heat of the moment. I was maintaining discipline." "Discipline?" Reynolds slammed his hand on the desk. "You just destroyed your career, Daniel. You don't put your hands on a subordinate ever." Cross didn't respond. The words sank in, heavy and final. He looked down at his own hand, the one that struck her. It trembled slightly. Reynolds continued, his voice low but cutting. "I've already reported it up the chain. Colonel Davis is handling it now. You're to remain confined to quarters until further notice." Cross's head snapped up. "Sir, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain," Reynolds interrupted. "Command is moving fast. The higher-ups are taking this seriously." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Do you know what that means?" Cross said nothing. Reynolds leaned forward. "It means this is no longer between you and her. It's between you and the United States Army." Outside, the wind picked up across the desert, carrying dust and whispers through the camp. Word spread faster than the sun moved. Every soldier who'd witnessed the slap retold it in hushed voices, each version more haunting than the last. By the time the clock struck 12:06 p.m., the entire base knew what had happened. Inside the operations room, phones buzzed, radios crackled. A message came through priority transmission from Regional Command Headquarters. "Colonel Davis," the operator said, voice trembling as he read the code. "We've been ordered to prepare for immediate inspection. Command has dispatched oversight officers. Ada 3 minutes. Reynolds froze. 3 minutes? Yes, sir. 3 minutes. Colonel Davis didn't hesitate. He turned to his staff. Clear the field. Lock down the base. I want Cross under supervision, Harper in the infirmary, and all witnesses identified. This is now an official incident." "Yes, sir." Back on the training grounds, soldiers scrambled into motion. Vehicles roared, orders were shouted, the once quiet base now a frenzy of controlled chaos. Helicopters could already be heard faintly in the distance, the unmistakable chop of rotor blades cutting through the dry air. Private Harper was escorted by a medic toward the infirmary. As she walked, she caught the reflection of her bruised cheek in a window pane. The mark wasn't deep, but it was enough. Enough to change everything. She wasn't angry, at least, not yet. She was still processing. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. A soldier's strength is not how hard she hits, but how long she stands after being struck. She took a deep breath and kept walking. In the barracks, recruits gathered in uneasy silence. One whispered, "You think he'll get away with it?" Another shook his head. "Not this time. Not with what's coming." The helicopters grew louder. Dust whipped across the base as 3 shadows descended from the sky. The first chopper bore the insignia of Major General Whitmore, head of regional operations. The second carried Brigadier General Ramirez, chief of ethics enforcement. The third, Lieutenant General Holloway, the man who oversaw the entire Southwestern Command. 3 generals, each known for their zero-tolerance policies, were about to step foot on Fork Ridge. Captain Reynolds and Colonel Davis stood on the landing pad as the helicopters touched down. The sound was deafening, the wind kicking up dirt that stung their faces. When the doors opened, the generals stepped out with the authority of men who had seen everything and tolerated nothing. "Colonel Davis," said General Whitmore, his voice like gravel, "you reported an assault on your base?" "Yes, sir." "Confirmed and verified by multiple witnesses." "Then why," Whitmore said coldly, "is your training field still operational?" Davis blinked. "Sir?" "Shut it down," Whitmore snapped. "Immediately." Within seconds, the base sirens blared along, wailing sound that signaled every ongoing operation to cease. Recruits dropped what they were doing. Vehicles stopped. Even the birds seemed to fall silent. From her cot in the infirmary, Emily heard the alarm. The nurse beside her muttered, "They've shut the base down." Emily turned her head slowly, staring out the small window at the swirling dust beyond. The sound of the helicopters still echoed faintly through the air. She didn't know yet what would happen next, but something inside her shifted. She felt no fear, no shame, just a strange, calm certainty that justice had begun to move. Out on the tarmac, the generals walked toward the command building, their medals glinting under the brutal sun. Soldiers saluted as they passed, faces pale. Fork Ridge, once a fortress of discipline and control, had just become a battlefield of conscience. In exactly 3 minutes, power had shifted from one man's hand to the weight of an entire nation's justice. The heat over Fork Ridge shimmered like molten glass as the 3 generals walked side by side toward the command building. Soldiers scattered from their path, boots clicking, eyes low. No one spoke. The only sounds were the rhythmic thud of the generals, boots and the low hum of the cooling systems fighting against the desert air. Inside the operations room, officers scrambled to clear desks, hide disarray, and pull up reports. Colonel Davis stood at attention near the entrance, his uniform immaculate, but his nerves visible. He'd seen investigations before, but never one that involved 3 generals arriving within minutes of an incident. That alone told him something terrible had reached the highest echelons of command. When the doors opened, Major General Whitmore entered first, a man in his early 60s, tall, silver-haired, and known for a face that never smiled. His reputation was legend, fair, but ruthless when it came to breaches of conduct. Behind him came Brigadier General Ramirez, younger but sharper, with eyes that caught every detail. Last was Lieutenant General Holloway, a quiet man who rarely spoke in public, but whose words carried the weight of law when he did. The moment they stepped in, the atmosphere changed. The chatter died. Even the buzzing of machines seemed to fade. Whitmore's first words were simple, but they landed like thunder. "Who's responsible for this mess?" Colonel Davis saluted. "Sir, Sergeant Daniel Cross, training officer, engaged in physical assault on Private Emily Harper during a field exercise." Witnesses confirm. Whitmore didn't react immediately. He removed his cap, set it on the table, and looked around the room. "Where is he now?" "Confined to quarters, sir. Under armed supervision." "And the recruit?" "In the infirmary, sir. Mild bruising. No severe injuries." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "The bruise isn't the problem, Colonel. It's what that hand represented." Ramirez stepped forward. "We want every second of footage from the field cameras. Every statement. Every radio transmission. Now." Officers hurried to comply. Within minutes, the large display screens lit up, showing video feeds from the training ground. The moment replayed in grainy silence, the shouting, the heated exchange, and finally, the strike. Even the generals leaned forward slightly, their expressions hardening. Whitmore's voice was cold. "Pause." The screen froze on the image of Sergeant Cross's hand mid-swing. Emily's face turned slightly to the side. "That," he said, pointing to the screen, "is how a uniform disgraces itself." Silence followed, so complete that even the hum of the AC felt too loud. Ramirez folded his arms. "You know, Whitmore, this isn't just about one man losing his temper. This is about a culture. You've got recruits who think obedience means silence, even in the face of abuse." Holloway, who had been silent so far, finally spoke. His voice was low and even, but it silenced everyone instantly. The United States Army has spent decades teaching strength with honor. What I see here is fear disguised as discipline. Whitmore nodded once. "Lock down the base. No one leaves. No communication goes out. This investigation is classified until further notice." Colonel Davis swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." As the orders spread, Fort Ridge turned into a pressure cooker. Soldiers were ordered to remain in barracks. Training schedules were suspended. The once bustling base became eerily quiet, the stillness broken only by the distant thump of helicopter rotors and the occasional bark of an order. In the infirmary, Private Emily Harper sat on a cot, her uniform collar loosened, her cheek now faintly purple. The medic, a gentle man named Sergeant Miller, dabbed antiseptic on the bruise. "You did nothing wrong, Private," he said softly. "You know that, right?" Emily managed a faint smile. "I know. I just didn't expect all of this." Outside the infirmary, 2 officers stood guard. It wasn't for her safety, it was procedure. She was now a central figure in an official inquiry. At that same moment, in his locked quarters, Sergeant Cross sat on the edge of his bunk, his hands trembling slightly. He'd been in firefights that felt less suffocating than this silence. His mind kept replaying that moment over and over, the look in Emily's eyes, the silence afterward, the way the entire squad had frozen. He had always prided himself on control. But in that instant, he had lost it, and with it, everything he'd ever worked for. A knock came at the door. 2 MPs entered. "Sergeant Cross," one of them said. "You're wanted for questioning. Now." Cross stood, adjusting his uniform automatically, as if habit might save him. He followed them down the long, sterile corridor to the command building. Every soldier who saw him looked away. When he entered the operations room, the 3 generals were waiting. Whitmore didn't gesture for him to sit. "Sergeant Cross," he said, his voice calm but razor-sharp. "Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" "Yes, sir." "Then explain yourself." Cross hesitated. "Sir, it was an accident. I lost my composure, but I never intended." Ramirez cut him off. "You lost your composure? You struck a subordinate in front of 30 witnesses. You humiliated the uniform you wear. That's not losing composure, Sergeant, that's moral collapse." Cross's lips parted, but no words came. Whitmore leaned forward. "You think that bruise will heal, Sergeant?" "It will. But the stain you left on your record, and on this base, will outlast your career." Cross finally spoke, voice low. "I've given my life to this army, sir. 20 years. I've buried friends in foreign soil. And none of that," Holloway interrupted quietly, "gives you the right to hit the people you're supposed to protect." Cross fell silent. His shoulders slumped. Whitmore stood. "You'll remain under arrest pending formal review. Until then, this base is shut down, dismissed." The MPs took him by the arms and led him away. When the door closed, Holloway turned to the others. "This isn't just punishment," he said. "This is reform. If Cross cracked under pressure, how many more like him are out there?" Ramirez nodded grimly. "Too many. We've been training soldiers to obey, but not to think. That ends here." Whitmore looked out the window. The desert stretched endlessly beyond the wire fences, the horizon shimmering like heat on steel. "End it here, start it here," he said. "Fort Ridge will be the example." By late afternoon, the base was locked down tight. Officers worked in silence, compiling witness reports. The sound of typing filled the command center like rain. One by one, the soldiers who'd witnessed the incident were brought in. Most of them were nervous, unsure of what to say. But every account was consistent. Emily had not provoked him. Cross had snapped. When Emily was finally called, she stood before the generals with perfect composure. Her salute was crisp, her posture straight. "Private Harper," Whitmore began, "we know what happened, but we want to hear it from you." Emily took a breath. "Sir, I made a mistake in formation. Sergeant Cross corrected me verbally, and I complied. When I tried to explain my reasoning, he took it as defiance. Then he struck me." Her tone was steady, professional. Not a trace of bitterness. Whitmore studied her. "Did you say anything after that?" "Yes, sir. I asked for permission to return to formation." The room went quiet. Ramirez looked at her with a faint expression of disbelief. "You didn't react?" "No, sir," she said. "I'm a soldier. My reaction is to stand." For a moment, even Whitmore seemed at a loss for words. Finally, he nodded. "You did the right thing, Private. You upheld the code when he broke it. That's rare." Emily saluted again. "Thank you, sir." As she left, Holloway leaned toward the others. "That one," he said softly, "has a future. Outside." The sun began to set over the desert, casting long shadows across Fort Ridge, the base. Once a place of rigid drills and shouted commands, now stood silent under the weight of accountability. Inside the command building, The three generals remained in conference long after dark. They weren't just discussing Cross. They were discussing the system that had created him. When they finally emerged, Whitmore turned to Colonel Davis. "Prepare the statement. Tomorrow morning, we make it official. Fort Ridge operations are suspended indefinitely. Every soldier here will undergo retraining in conduct and leadership." Davis saluted. "Yes, sir." As the lights dimmed across the base, a single phrase echoed in Whitmore's mind. A phrase that would later headline reports, speeches and reforms. Discipline is not violence. Courage is not cruelty. And with that, the U.S. Army began to change, starting from the ground, where one slap had shaken its conscience. Dawn broke cold and colorless over Fort Ridge. A thin mist hung low over the compound, and the usual morning drills were nowhere to be seen. The once bustling base was eerily quiet. The parade ground that had echoed with shouted orders and boot stomps now lay deserted, the flag at half-mast flapping weakly in the wind. For the first time in years, Fort Ridge was on total lockdown. No training. No departures. No chatter. Every soldier on the base could feel that something monumental had shifted. In the mess hall, small groups of soldiers sat whispering over untouched trays of eggs and coffee. Conversations stopped the moment officers entered. Everyone had heard bits and pieces of what happened the day before the strike. The arrest, the arrival of the three generals, but no one knew the full story. Rumors spread like wildfire. That Sergeant Cross had been court-martialed overnight, that Private Harper was being promoted, that the generals were about to dismantle the entire command staff. None of it could be confirmed, but the tension in the air was heavy enough to taste. At 0800 hours, loudspeakers crackled across the base. "All personnel, report to the main assembly yard immediately. Attendance is mandatory." Chairs scraped. Boots hit concrete. Within minutes, hundreds of soldiers formed ranks under the pale morning sky. The entire command structure stood on a raised platform, Colonel Davis in the center, flanked by Generals Whitmore, Ramirez, and Holloway. Whitmore stepped forward first. He didn't need a microphone. His voice carried naturally, deep and sharp. "Fort Ridge," he began, "has always stood for discipline, courage, and loyalty. But yesterday, something happened that betrayed those values." A ripple of unease moved through the ranks. No one dared move or whisper. A soldier, Whitmore continued, raised his hand not in defense, not in combat, but in anger, against one of his own. "And that, soldiers, is an act we cannot, and will not, tolerate." His gaze swept over the crowd like a searchlight. Some of you witnessed it. Some of you heard about it. All of you are now a part of the reform that begins today. Ramirez took the podium next. "Effective immediately, Fort Ridge is under suspension of regular operations. This base will undergo a full conduct review. Every drill sergeant, every training officer, and every chain of command leader will be evaluated. You will all receive new training, not just in tactics, but in honor." There was a pause as her words sank in. Ramirez was known as a relentless reformer. She had dismantled toxic units before and rebuilt them from the ground up. Her tone left no doubt. This wasn't a warning. It was a purge. Then came Holloway, the quietest but most commanding of the three. "We do not destroy the army by acknowledging its flaws," he said softly. "We strengthen it. Yesterday, one man failed. But today, all of us must answer for why that failure was allowed to happen." The soldiers stood frozen. Some looked ashamed, others angry, but no one spoke. At the end of the speech, Whitmore concluded, "Fort Ridge will not train another recruit until this base remembers what kind of warriors it's meant to produce. You are dismissed until further orders." The crowd broke silently. No one clapped. No one cheered. It wasn't a moment for applause. Later that morning, inside the infirmary, Emily Harper sat by the window, the early sunlight slanting across her face. The bruise had faded to a soft yellow, but her thoughts were anything but calm. She'd watched the speech from her bed, and though the words had been powerful, they didn't erase the memory of that moment, the sting, the shock, the instant silence that followed. Sergeant Miller entered quietly, carrying a clipboard. "Private Harper," he said gently, "Command wants to see you in the review room. The generals are convening witness testimonies." She nodded, pulling her uniform jacket back on. "Yes, sir." Her steps echoed down the empty hallways. The base felt like a ghost town. When she entered the review room, the same three generals were seated at the long wooden table, with Colonel Davis beside them. Whitmore gestured to the chair. "At ease, Private. Please sit." Emily sat, hands folded on her lap. "Private Harper," Holloway began, "we've reviewed your statement and the witness reports. You've been honest and composed. But we'd like to hear one more thing from your perspective. How do you think this should be handled?" Emily blinked, taken aback. "Sir, that's not my decision to make." Whitmore's tone softened slightly. "Maybe not officially, but your opinion matters. You were the one struck. You endured it with restraint. Tell us, what does justice look like to you?" She hesitated. "Sir, I believe Sergeant Cross should face consequences for his actions. But I also believe people can change. I don't want to destroy him. I just want this never to happen again to anyone." For a moment, the room was silent. Ramirez leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly, not in suspicion, but in thought. "You'd forgive him?" she asked. Emily nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means letting go of the weight." Whitmore exhaled slowly, looking at Holloway. "You hear that? That's leadership in its purest form." Holloway gave a small nod. "Indeed." They dismissed her, but as she walked out, the room remained heavy with thought. Meanwhile, in the holding quarters, Sergeant Cross sat on his cot, uniform stripped of insignia, awaiting his fate. The door opened without warning, and General Ramirez entered, flanked by two MPs. Cross stood instantly, his voice hoarse. "Ma'am." "At ease," Ramirez said curtly, then dismissed the MPs with a nod. When they left, she approached him slowly. "You know what I see when I look at you, Sergeant?" He stayed silent. "A man who's been broken by his own pride," she said. "I've seen it before. You built your identity around control. And when it slipped, when a young recruit made you feel powerless, you lashed out." Cross's jaw tightened. "That's not—" "Don't," she interrupted sharply. "Don't defend it. You know what you did. You've got two choices now. Wallow in self-pity or use this to make sure no one ever repeats your mistake." He stared at the floor. "I don't deserve a second chance." Ramirez's expression softened, just slightly. "Maybe not, but she thinks you do." Cross's head snapped up. "She? What?" "Private Harper. She asked us not to destroy you. She said she forgives you." For the first time in hours, the hardened soldier's mask cracked. His throat tightened, words failing him. "She forgave me?" Ramirez nodded. "You think on that, Sergeant. That's the kind of soldier you should have been training others to become." With that, she turned and left. Cross sat back down slowly, her words echoing in his mind. He had spent 2 decades teaching men to fight. Now, for the first time, he was learning how to face himself. By evening, Fort Ridge glowed under the amber light of sunset. The air was still, as if the base itself were holding its breath. In the command office, Whitmore, Ramirez, and Holloway sat around a table scattered with reports. Holloway closed a file and looked at the others. "The damage is deep," he said quietly. "But the response—" has been deeper. Whitmore leaned back. The public will hear about this soon. When they do, they'll see that we don't cover up our failures, we confront them. Ramirez smiled faintly. That's what makes us different. Whitmore rose, staring out the window at the fading horizon. Fork Ridge will reopen when it's ready. Not when it's perfect, but when it's better. Outside, Emily walked across the parade ground, her shadow long behind her. For the first time since that terrible moment, she felt something return a quiet strength. The base was silent, yes, but in that silence, something new was being born. Something cleaner, stronger, something worth rebuilding. 2 days after Fort Ridge went silent, the story leaked. It began with a rumor on a small military discussion forum, someone claiming that a base in the Southwest has been shut down by generals after a training officer hit a recruit. Within hours, the rumor caught the attention of a defense journalist named Laura Kane, a reporter known for uncovering what others tried to bury. By the next morning, major networks were calling it the Fort Ridge Incident. Satellite vans appeared outside the gates. Camera crews waited beyond the fence line, and reporters shouted questions into microphones every time a vehicle passed. Is it true a general personally intervened? Has the Army covered up abuse before? Who is the female recruit at the center of the scandal? Fort Ridge, once an isolated training post in the middle of the desert, had suddenly become the focal point of a national debate. Inside the command office, General Whitmore watched the news feed in silence. The scrolling headlines were relentless. Army base shut down after alleged assault, top command under investigation. Who is the woman behind the Fort Ridge reform? Ramirez crossed her arms. They're eating it alive, she said bitterly. They don't care about reform. They care about spectacle. Whitmore didn't look away from the screen. Maybe, but sometimes it takes a storm to clean the air. Holloway sat quietly beside them, flipping through the latest investigation reports. The Inspector General's office is coming tomorrow. They'll want full access. Every file, every recording. Good, Whitmore said. Let them see everything. We have nothing to hide. But deep down, he knew the truth was complicated. The Army prided itself on discipline and control, but when that control turned into silence, it became a shield for cruelty. Fort Ridge wasn't the first time something like this had happened. It was simply the first time it had been seen. Meanwhile, Private Emily Harper sat alone in the base library, the only quiet place left untouched by the chaos outside. The shelves smelled of dust and old paper. A single shaft of sunlight cut through the blinds, painting a golden stripe across the floor. She had been advised to avoid the press. The generals had made it clear that she was not to speak publicly until the investigation concluded. Yet, her name had already begun to circulate. Some praised her courage. Others called her a symbol. But Emily didn't feel like a symbol. She felt like a person caught in a storm she never asked for. As she turned a page in the book she wasn't really reading, the door opened. Colonel Davis entered, his expression softer than usual. "Private Harper," he said. "May I sit?" She nodded. He sat across from her, folding his hands. "You've handled yourself remarkably well." Most soldiers would have been overwhelmed by this kind of attention. Emily smiled faintly. "I still am, sir?" He nodded slowly. "That's fair. But I want you to know something. The generals, especially General Whitmore, they see something in you. You reminded them why they joined in the first place. Integrity, strength, restraint." She looked up, surprised. "Sir, I only did what anyone should do." Davis shook his head. "No, Harper. You did what most wouldn't. You stood tall when someone tried to break you, and you refused to let anger make you small. That's rare." He stood, giving a slight smile. "Keep that. You're going to need it." When he left, She sat still for a long time, hearing his words echo in her mind. That evening, the generals gathered again in the conference room. The walls were covered with evidence charts, statements, and timelines. The room felt heavy with decisions. Whitmore stood at the head of the table, his sleeves rolled up. We've confirmed the incident. Witnesses, recordings, even the trajectory data from training drones all align. There's no ambiguity. Holloway nodded. Sergeant Cross will face court-martial. The question is, how public should we make it? Ramirez frowned. You're suggesting transparency? I'm suggesting we stop pretending, Holloway said. The nation already knows something happened. If we hide the truth, we'll look complicit. If we tell it openly, we lead the change. Whitmore's eyes hardened. If we go public, we expose the cracks in our own house. Exactly, Holloway said quietly. And maybe it's time. A silence followed. Finally, Whitmore nodded once. Then it's settled. We'll make a statement tomorrow. The Army will own its failure and its reform. The next morning, a press conference was held outside the gates of Fort Ridge. Rows of microphones lined the podium, cameras flashing in the desert sun. Soldiers stood at attention behind the generals, their faces solemn. Whitmore stepped forward, his uniform crisp, his voice steady. Yesterday's events at Fort Ridge revealed a truth we can no longer ignore, he began. Discipline is not violence. Leadership is not intimidation. The incident involving Sergeant Daniel Cross and Private Emily Harper has forced us to look inward to question not just what we teach, but how we teach it. The reporters scribbled furiously. Whitmore continued. Effective immediately, Sergeant Cross has been removed from command and will face court-martial under Article 128 for assault. Fort Ridge will remain under suspension until our training protocols have been restructured. He paused, looking directly into the cameras. To the families who entrust us with their sons and daughters, we will do better. The flashbulbs went off like lightning. Behind him, Emily watched silently. Though her name wasn't mentioned, she felt every word like a weight and a promise. Later that afternoon, back inside the base, Emily was summoned again. This time, the meeting was private. Only the three generals were present. Private Harper, Whitmore said as she entered. Please, have a seat. She sat, unsure of what was coming. We've decided, Holloway said, that we'd like you to remain at Fort Ridge during the transition. Help oversee the new training initiative. Your perspective is valuable. Her eyes widened. Sir, I'm only a recruit. Exactly, Whitmore said. That's why you see things clearly. You're not conditioned to the old ways yet. You can help us build something better. Emily hesitated, then nodded slowly. If you believe I can help, sir, I'll do my best. Ramirez smiled faintly. That's all anyone can ask. As she left the room, she felt a strange mix of fear and pride. She hadn't expected any of this, but maybe that was the point. Real change didn't come from plans. It came from moments when someone refused to stay silent. That night, as the desert wind swept across the base, Emily stood outside the barracks, looking toward the distant lights of the media camp. She could almost hear the faint murmur of reporters filing their stories, broadcasting her name to the world. She didn't crave fame. She didn't want pity. All she wanted was for every soldier who came after her to be safe, to be trained with respect, not fear. Inside the command building, Whitmore and Holloway watched from the window. You think she knows how much this will change things? Holloway asked quietly. Whitmore shook his head. Not yet. But one day she will. Holloway gave a faint smile. Funny, isn't it? Sometimes it takes one act of violence to teach an army what peace looks like. Whitmore's gaze remained fixed on the parade ground. And sometimes he said softly. "It takes one soldier's courage to make generals remember what honor means." As the lights went out across Fork Ridge, the silence returned, but this time it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of reflection, of beginnings. For Emily, for the generals, for the army itself, something fundamental had changed. And though the world beyond the fences didn't know it yet, Fork Ridge was no longer just a base. It had become a lesson. The courtroom inside Fort Ridge's command building was stark. No grandeur, no marble columns, no dramatic lighting. Just plain walls, military flags, and a long wooden table that held the weight of years of service, mistakes, and judgment. Rows of soldiers filled the benches, their uniforms crisp, their faces expressionless. The base was still under lockdown, but for this event, everyone was granted access. The Army had decided this trial would not be hidden. Sergeant Daniel Cross stood beside his appointed defense officer, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. His once proud posture seemed to have caved inward slightly. His uniform was stripped of insignia, a visual reminder of everything he had lost. At the other end of the room sat the military tribunal, 3 officers of high rank, one of whom was General Whitmore himself. To his right was General Ramirez, representing command ethics. To his left, General Holloway, serving as presiding authority. The silence before the trial began was suffocating. Even the air seemed to pause. Then Holloway's voice broke through, calm but cutting. "This court-martial is now in session." The courtroom rose, then sat in unison. The flags barely stirred in the still air. Whitmore leaned forward. "Sergeant Daniel Cross, you stand accused of violating Article 128 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, assault upon a subordinate. How do you plead?" Cross swallowed, his voice gravelly. "Guilty, sir." The admission hit the room like a gust of wind. A murmur rippled through the benches, but Holloway raised a hand, silencing them instantly. "Very well," he said. "Then this proceeding will focus not on guilt, but on understanding." Cross's defense officer, Captain Lewis, stood. "Your Honors, the defendant acknowledges his actions without excuse. But before sentencing, we ask that the court hear his statement and the testimony of Private Harper." Whitmore nodded once. "Proceed." Sergeant Cross's statement rose slowly. The scrape of his chair echoed louder than expected. He faced the tribunal, eyes red but steady. "I'd spent 20 years in uniform," he began. "I've trained hundreds of soldiers, led men into combat zones, and buried brothers. I've always believed that strength came from control, that the only way to keep a unit together was to make them fear failure." He paused, his throat tightening. "But I forgot something. I forgot that fear doesn't build strength. It just hides weakness. And when Private Harper made a mistake that day, I saw it as defiance. I thought I was losing control of my unit. So I took it back with my hand." He looked down, his voice trembling now. "I became the kind of leader I swore I'd never be. I struck a soldier who trusted me. I broke the code I was supposed to protect." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the ceiling fans. "I've got no excuse," Cross said quietly. "No justification. I don't expect forgiveness. But I do want to say this." He looked directly at the tribunal, and then at the back of the room, where Emily sat silently. "I'm sorry. To her, to every soldier who ever looked up to me. I failed them." His voice broke on the last words. He sat down slowly, staring at his hands. Whitmore's face remained impassive, but his eyes betrayed something human, a faint flicker of respect for the man's honesty. Private Harper's testimony. When Emily's name was called, she rose and walked to the stand with quiet confidence. The courtroom turned as one, hundreds of eyes following her every step. She wore her standard fatigues, her posture perfect, her expression calm. But inside, her heart was pounding. She had faced field exercises, live drills, even fear, but nothing like this. When she took her seat, Holloway addressed her gently. "Private Harper, you may speak freely." She nodded. "Thank you, sir." Turning toward the tribunal, she began. What happened that day was wrong. Everyone saw it. Everyone knew it. But I also know Sergeant Cross wasn't a cruel man. He was a broken one. The kind who carries too much weight for too long until something inside gives out. A few officers exchanged glances. "I don't excuse what he did," Emily continued, "but I also don't hate him for it. I saw regret in his face the moment it happened. And when I think about the kind of army I want to serve in, I don't want it built on destroying people who make mistakes. I want it built on teaching them never to make them again." Whitmore leaned forward slightly, studying her. "Private Harper, you're suggesting mercy?" She met his eyes. "Sir, I'm suggesting growth. If we can rebuild bases, retrain soldiers, and reform systems, we can also reform people." The room was silent. Whitmore exchanged a look with Ramirez, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Thank you, Private," Holloway said softly. "You may return to your seat." As Emily walked back, she felt every heartbeat in her chest. She didn't know what effect her words would have, but she had spoken her truth. Deliberation and verdict. The generals withdrew for nearly an hour. The courtroom buzzed with whispered speculation. Soldiers fidgeted. The tension felt like a physical weight. When the tribunal finally returned, the entire room stood. Holloway spoke first. "Sergeant Daniel Cross, this court has reviewed the facts and testimonies. Your actions violated the code of conduct and the trust placed in you as a leader. The consequences of that breach are severe." Cross stood, his jaw tight, waiting. Whitmore continued. "However, this court also recognizes your service record, your admission of guilt, and the testimony of Private Harper, who has shown extraordinary restraint and compassion." He paused. "Therefore, Sergeant Daniel Cross is hereby dismissed from service under dishonorable discharge, to serve 12 months of confinement with mandatory participation in the military reform program on leadership and ethics." A collective breath rippled through the room. It wasn't a light sentence, but it wasn't pure punishment either. It was accountability with a chance at redemption. Cross bowed his head. "Understood, sir." Holloway added, "This tribunal believes that justice without humanity is tyranny. And today, we choose to build something better." He struck the gavel once. "This court is adjourned." When it ended, the room emptied slowly. Reporters outside the gate would soon know everything. The verdict would be dissected, debated, politicized. But for those inside Fort Ridge, it felt like closure. Cross was escorted quietly from the room. As he passed by Emily, he paused for just a second. Their eyes met. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. In that brief exchange, between the soldier who struck and the one who forgave, something unspoken passed, a shared understanding of pain, regret, and rebirth. That night, the base was alive again, not with drills or orders, but with motion. Trucks moved, lights flickered, officers walked with purpose. The lockdown was being lifted. Fort Ridge was coming back to life. Inside his quarters, Whitmore wrote his report to Central Command. The words were simple, but the meaning profound. Fort Ridge is no longer a training ground. It is now a model for what the military must become: disciplined, honorable, and human. He set the paper aside and looked out the window. In the distance, Emily was walking along the same path where it had all begun. Ramirez entered quietly. "Long day," she said. Whitmore nodded. "Long year, I'd say." She smiled faintly. Worth it, though. We didn't just save a base, Whitmore. We saved its soul. He looked at her, then back at the horizon. And maybe, he said softly, it took one strike to remind us never to raise another. Outside, the flag fluttered against the evening sky. The base lights glowed softly. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. For Emily, it was the first time she felt truly free. For Cross, it was the first step toward forgiveness. And for the generals, it was the proof that even in the hardest systems, hearts could still change. 3 days after the trial of Sergeant Daniel Cross, the story escaped the fences of Fort Ridge and swept across the nation like wildfire. What began as a local military incident now blazed across headlines. Assault at Fort Ridge. Generals intervene within minutes. Private's courage sparks historic reform in U.S. Army culture. Disgraced sergeant confesses. Victim calls for compassion, not revenge. By sunrise, every major news channel was running the footage. Shaky clips recorded by soldiers during the trial, snippets leaked by insiders, and commentary from every corner of the political spectrum. 1. The media storm cable news anchors dissected the story hour by hour. On one network, analysts praised Emily Harper as a symbol of moral strength. On another, critics accused the military of covering up systemic rot. In one viral clip, a retired colonel said solemnly, "When a general shuts down a base in 3 minutes, that's not just protocol. That's conscience in motion. It's leadership we haven't seen in decades." Meanwhile, Emily's face, quiet, composed, and unassuming, became the image of integrity. She had refused all interview requests, staying inside the base during the transition period. But her silence only made the public more curious. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #FortRidgeTruth and #HarperEffect trended for days. Soldiers from other bases began anonymously sharing their own experiences of fear, harassment, and unchecked authority. Within a week, what happened at Fort Ridge wasn't just a military scandal. It had become a movement. 2. Emily's unexpected spotlight. Inside her dorm, Emily stared at the television in disbelief. Her photo was everywhere, news articles, documentaries, even posters calling her the voice of the voiceless. She wasn't comfortable with any of it. She hadn't wanted fame. She had wanted fairness. Captain Rivera knocked on her door. "You ready?" "For what?" Emily asked, setting down the remote. "The general's office. He wants to talk." Her stomach tightened. "Am I in trouble?" Rivera smiled faintly. "Not even close. You're about to change more than just this base." When she entered General Whitmore's office, she was surprised to see 2 other figures. General Ramirez and a civilian in a dark blue suit, Senator Evelyn Carter, chair of the Defense Oversight Committee. Whitmore motioned her to sit. "Private Harper, this is Senator Carter. She's been following the Fort Ridge case personally." The senator extended her hand. "You've done something extraordinary, Private. You've reminded this nation that courage doesn't always carry a weapon." Emily hesitated before shaking her hand. "I didn't do anything extraordinary, ma'am. I just told the truth." The senator smiled. "That's what makes it extraordinary." She turned to Whitmore. "General, I've been authorized to form a congressional subcommittee on leadership ethics within the military. And I want Private Harper to testify, not as a victim, but as a witness to reform." Emily froze. "Testify? In Congress?" Whitmore nodded slowly. "You'll have protection, full support, and the nation's attention, if you're willing." Emily looked at each of them, Ramirez's encouraging eyes, Whitmore's steady calm, and Carter's hopeful gaze. "I'll do it," she said softly. "But only if we use this to help others, not to shame one man." Whitmore smiled faintly. That's exactly why you're the right person for it. 3. Cross behind bars, meanwhile, in a low-security confinement facility in Kansas. Sergeant Daniel Cross watched the same headlines from a small television bolted to the wall. He sat alone on his bunk, his hands folded. Every time he saw Emily's name, something in his chest ached, not with anger, but with disbelief that she had spoken for him when he didn't deserve it. The guard tapped the doorframe. Cross, mail. He handed him an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in clean, simple script. You taught us discipline. I hope now you learn grace. E. Harper. He read it twice, then a third time. For the first time in years, Daniel Cross felt something close to peace. 4. The congressional hearing 2 weeks later. The marble halls of Washington, D.C. echoed with cameras and whispers. The committee chamber was full. Senators, military officials, journalists, and citizens. The plaque outside the door read, "Hearing on Military Ethics and Leadership Conduct." When Emily stepped up to the microphone, a flash of cameras nearly blinded her. She took a deep breath, her heart thudding. "Private Harper," Senator Carter began, "thank you for being here. Please, tell us what you witnessed at Fork Ridge." Emily's voice was steady. "It wasn't just what I saw. It was what I felt. I saw fear, not of war, but of authority. I saw leaders who believed that control was power. But I also saw that power can destroy, if it's never questioned." The senators listened in silence. "I don't want revenge," she continued. "I want reform. I want soldiers to know they can speak without fear. I want leaders to remember that respect isn't forced, it's earned." The words rippled through the chamber like a quiet storm. When she finished, there was no applause. Only stillness, the kind that comes when truth hits too deep to respond. 5. A nation divided within hours. Her testimony was everywhere. Millions watched it live. Millions more replayed it online. Some hailed her as a hero. Others accused her of undermining discipline. Opinion pieces flooded the internet. The Harper Doctrine. Compassion in command. Is the Army going soft? A new face of American courage. But amidst the noise, something undeniable happened. The U.S. Army officially launched Operation Honor Code, a comprehensive reform plan to rebuild leadership standards from the ground up. Every officer, from sergeant to general, would undergo mandatory ethics retraining. At bases across the country, soldiers gathered in halls to watch the announcement. Whitmore stood beside the Secretary of Defense as he declared, "Fort Ridge was a wake-up call. We will not ignore it." The crowd erupted in applause. 6. The public's heart late that night. In a small diner off Route 66, a group of veterans sat huddled around a TV. One of them, an old Marine named Hawkins, tapped the screen. "That girl's got more backbone than half the officers I ever served under," he said, sipping his coffee. Another laughed. "She's the reason my granddaughter just applied to the academy." Moments like that played out across the country, in diners, living rooms, and military families who saw hope for the first time in years. 7. Emily's quiet resolve after the hearing. Reporters chased her for interviews, endorsements, even book deals. But she refused them all. She returned to Fort Ridge, now reopened under a new motto engraved at the gate, "Strength through honor." Whitmore met her at the training field. "You've changed the nation, Harper," he said. She smiled faintly. "I just told the truth," he chuckled. "And that's exactly what this country needed." She turned toward the sunrise over the base. The wind carried the distant sound of marching. New recruits, new officers, new beginnings. For a moment, she closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "We rebuilt more than a base. We rebuilt belief." 8. A legacy begins months later. Textbooks began including a new chapter under modern military reform. It was titled, The Fort Ridge Transformation. At the end of the entry was a simple quote, "Real strength is not in silence. It's in standing up when others can't." Private Emily Harper, Congressional Testimony, 2025. Her story had become more than a case. It was a catalyst. A reminder that one act of courage could challenge an entire system. And though the world moved on, Fort Ridge stood as living proof that honor, when tested, could still rise again. Months had passed since the trial. Fort Ridge was no longer the tense, silent base it had been the day the three generals arrived. Its walls now echoed with drills, laughter, and conversation, but the air carried a different energy. Accountability, respect, and pride in discipline rebuilt on integrity. New training programs were in full effect. Ethics courses replaced repetitive drills. Soldiers were taught leadership by example rather than fear. Even the physical exercises carried lessons about responsibility, teamwork, and the human cost of misused authority. On a crisp morning, a black SUV arrived at the base. From it emerged Sergeant Daniel Cross, escorted under supervised release. He had served his 12 months, undergone rehabilitation, and been assigned to a mentorship program for young recruits at another base. He walked the grounds of Fort Ridge slowly, taking in the changes. The parade ground gleamed, newly painted lines marking boundaries. Flags waved in the wind. Recruits practiced formations, calling out orders with pride rather than fear. Cross stopped in front of the training field where it had all begun. Memories hit him like a hammer, the moment he had struck Emily Harper, the silence that followed, the three generals who had arrived so quickly. He hadn't realized until now the weight of that instant. Then he saw her. Emily was supervising a small squad of recruits, demonstrating proper posture and attention during a drill. Her hair pulled back, uniform precise, eyes focused. She was calm, confident, the same young woman whose courage had once changed his life. Cross swallowed hard, realizing that she was not broken by that moment. She had risen stronger, and in her strength, she had reshaped the base itself. He approached cautiously, and Emily noticed him. Her recruits paused, unsure, but she gestured for them to continue. The two of them stood alone on the field, a distance heavy with history between them. "Sergeant Cross," Emily said quietly. "Harper," he replied, voice low, almost trembling. "I thank you for everything." She nodded. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for the future of this base, and for every soldier who comes after us." He glanced around, taking in the renewed energy of the grounds. "I see that now. I see what I broke, and what you helped rebuild." Her gaze was steady. "You've changed, I hope?" Cross looked down, his throat tightening. "I'm trying. I have to. I owe that to you, to every soldier I've led, and to myself." Emily gave a faint smile. "Then start by teaching others what you've learned. Lead with integrity. Lead with respect." Cross nodded, a weight lifting from his shoulders. He knew this was not forgiveness for the past. It never would be, but it was a path forward. Inside the command office, Generals Whitmore, Ramirez, and Holloway observed the renewed base from a balcony. Whitmore spoke first, nodding toward Emily and Cross on the field. "This is why we intervened. Not punishment, not scandal, but transformation." Ramirez smiled. "It's rare to see courage like hers and humility like his in the same place." Holloway added quietly, "It's more than rare. It's what we've been training for all along, the kind of leaders this army should produce." Whitmore exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the horizon. "And it starts here, Fort Ridge, where one moment of violence taught an entire system what honor truly means." The story of Fort Ridge had spread beyond military walls. Across the country, schools, training programs, and even corporate organizations cited Emily Harper's testimony as a model of ethical courage. She became a quiet symbol, a living lesson that leadership and accountability were inseparable. For her, the recognition was humbling. She never sought fame, yet it found her anyway. Each time she spoke to groups of recruits, she emphasized the same principle: discipline without respect is meaningless. Courage without integrity is dangerous. Remember that, and you will never break what you are meant to build. Meanwhile, Cross, far away at his new post, watched it unfold in the news. He knew he had contributed nothing to this fame. Yet the quiet pride he felt was enough a reminder that sometimes transformation could ripple far beyond individual actions. On a particularly bright morning, the base held a symbolic event. A full formation of soldiers lined up on the parade ground, the new flag raised proudly above them. Emily Harper stepped forward, addressing them. Today, we remember what it means to serve, not just with strength, but with integrity. Every soldier here carries a responsibility, not only to follow orders, but to uphold honor. You are the future. Fork Ridge is your foundation. Build it well. Whitmore, Ramirez, and Holloway watched silently as the soldiers executed perfect drills, precision, focus, and discipline evident in every movement. But this was different. The movements carried purpose beyond training, a lesson in respect, self-control, and accountability. After the final drill, Emily saluted. The entire formation returned it a ripple of unity and commitment. For Emily, it was the first time she felt fully at home in her own courage. Cross returned to the base one last time to say goodbye. Emily met him at the edge of the training field. "You've done well," she said. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," Cross admitted. "Without the generals stepping in. Without your testimony." Emily shook her head. "I only showed the truth. It was the Army's job to change. You just had to walk with it." Cross took a deep breath. "I will, and I will teach what I've learned every day for the rest of my life. That is my last duty." Emily nodded. "Then consider this the last salute. Not to the past, but to the future." They raised their hands in a salute. Neither spoke. But the moment was heavy with meaning, forgiveness, respect, and the promise of redemption. In the months that followed, Fork Ridge became a national case study in military ethics. Soldiers trained there graduated not only with tactical skills, but also with leadership grounded in respect, empathy, and accountability. Every new officer learned the story of Emily Harper and Sergeant Daniel Cross, how one act of courage and one moment of failure could reshape the culture of an institution. Textbooks, documentaries, and lectures cited the events as the turning point. Fork Ridge 2025, the day the U.S. Army remembered its humanity. And though the media moved on, the lessons remained. Emily continued her service, quietly guiding recruits. Cross, far away at a new base, integrated ethics into his mentorship. Both understood that one moment could echo through countless lives, but it took courage, humility, and reflection to turn it into lasting change. On a late afternoon, Emily walked across the parade ground alone, the golden sun casting long shadows behind her. She paused at the center, looking at the raised flag above Fort Ridge. She thought of the past months, the slap, the general's arrival, the trial, the testimony, and the reforms. Every moment had been a lesson, every consequence a challenge. She raised her hand, slow and deliberate, in a salute. Not to a person, not to a rank, but to honor, to courage, to integrity. For Fork Ridge, for every soldier who would pass through its gates, and for the nation watching, the salute carried meaning beyond words. And as the wind rippled through the flags, carrying the sound of distant footsteps and distant voices, Emily lowered her hand with a quiet smile. Fork Ridge had been broken, but it had been rebuilt. And in its reconstruction lay hope. For the Army, for its soldiers, for the nation, and for one young recruit who had dared to stand. The story ended here, but the legacy, the honor, the courage, and the lesson of Fort Ridge would endure forever.